United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres at the climate conference COP27 in Egypt said, humanity has a choice to cooperate or perish. He was making reference to the current trajectory of immense climatic impacts occasioned by floods, hurricanes, and what he called climate chaos gallops ahead, which no country or economy is immune to. The UN Secretary General called on developed countries to clarify their stance on the delivery of the $100 billion a year promised to support climate action in developing countries. This year, Nigeria has been hard hit by the most devastating flood ever, which claimed many lives, destroyed property and livelihoods, thus rendering many homeless and creating a huge humanitarian catastrophe. That is the focus of this edition of Frontiers, and my name is Obiageli Ugoke. Our guest is a special assistant to the President on Disaster Management and technical advisor to the Minister of Humanitarian Affairs, Disaster Management and Social Development. He is Group Captain Sadiq Garuba Shehu. Glad to have you on the program. Yes.
Thank you very much, madam.
The program continues shortly. Once more, you're welcome.
Thank you.
All right, now, it is evident that this year's flood is so devastating and it has left in Israel an overwhelming humanitarian crisis. Can you give us the actual situation in terms of persons affected and the quantum of destruction to property?
Unfortunately, like you said, I think in the history of Nigerian flooding, we used to count the 2012 flood as the worst in Nigeria, but we are tending towards that probably this 2022 flood is the worst that we have ever, witnessed. It is also important to realize the flood is ongoing. So whatever figures we give now, these are figures that move. But as our latest figure now, I can tell you we have deaths of more than 600 people. We have people that are displaced from their surroundings, from their dwellings, about 1.4 million people. We have people affected by this flood, either directly or indirectly, also numbering about 1.4 million people. In terms of area, area coverage, we have about 570,000 hectares of land that has been submerged or damaged. Of course, there are also damages in infrastructure, be they houses, dwelling for human beings, could there be schools, bridges, and some roads were washed up. So again, like I said, this is a moving figure. This is something with disaster. As we are going, some areas are not even accessible. So figures like of deaths and injuries, you cannot be certain until you have finally accessed all the areas. Some of the areas that have been cut off, you cannot reach. So we give these figures as they come to us. So unfortunately, the figures we are giving now might rise higher, because from the latest warning again from NEMA, I think the worst of the flood is not yet over, unfortunately.
Oh, really?
Yes.
With all this we experienced right now?
Yes.
Okay, now, there are already some complaints in some quarters and some states as well that they were excluded in the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs intervention. What would you say about that?
Well, you see, the ministry, as the name implies, is Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs, Disaster Management and Social Development. So when you look at the term itself, humanitarian affairs, when you are doing any humanitarian work, there are certain principles all over the world that guide humanitarian work. And these principles include humanity, independence, impartiality. These are some of the principles all over the world that you apply. I might take time to just briefly explain what I mean. When you say humanity, for the humanitarian worker or any humanitarian organization, what is important to you is to address suffering wherever you find it. Wherever. That's what humanity means. Impartiality, the humanitarian worker and like our humanitarian ministry is not concerned with any religious, ethnic, regional affiliation. The humanitarian person or the humanitarian ministry where we work is only concerned where is the need. If there is any difference that will be shown, it will be based on need. Of course, because resources are never enough to do everything, So when there's a disaster, you look at the most urgent, the most needy. That's what you address. So apart from that, honest, there's no anything that others, we are not, we'll be violating the humanitarian principles actually if we try to bring any other thing apart from actual humanitarian need. That's what, much as possible, with due respect, we work for politicians, and a politician is a politician. Unfortunately, any issue that comes, any politician would like to be seen. We can understand that. He would like to be seen with his people that I'm doing the best to get the best for you. But as a humanitarian worker, you step out from that debate. What you ask, where are the most needy? No matter, it doesn't matter their political affiliation, there is no any other distinction apart from the fact that this need. If we prioritize any area, if at all you prioritize, is prioritized by the fact that this area is more urgent or this area is the most needy. And so many factors might go in where a humanitarian might try to intervene here or there. Some people try to, to make whether this state is number one, this state is number two, but really it's not the concern of the humanitarian. Number first or number two or number three is relative. You have to understand the political units in Nigeria are local governments and wards at the lower level. So, for example, when you say state A is higher than state B, it is relative. Is it in terms of the number of people that died? And again, like I just finished telling you, even if you are talking of number of people that died, some areas have not been accessed yet. So any figure you get is inconclusive or you're able to affect. Is it in the size of the area? Some states may be unlucky. Maybe I'm just giving an example. Maybe they have 10 local governments. You might find that 10 local governments are affected. That is 100%. Another state may have 20 local governments, but only 4 are affected. For the humanitarian, all these figures are very necessary, not to show any distinction, but to guide your intervention. And even our lifestyle, unfortunately, God did not make us, the same.
Yes.
Even between human beings. Somebody who is financially more well off is more likely to resist the effect of a flood than somebody who, even before the flood, is struggling to feed. Some areas, they have mud houses. Some areas have brick houses. So you understand? So even the level of resilience of the different communities is the same. So when the humanitarian looks for any indices, it's just to make sure that we hold these humanitarian principles. In any work that the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs does, these principles of humanity, impartiality, independence is what guides our action. Not only the ministry, all the agencies under the ministry, because you will realize that it's not only the ministry that is working. It has agencies that are all involved in humanitarian. You have NEMA, you have the Northeast Development Commission, you have even the National Commission for Refugees, Migrants, you have the Commission for Elderly People, you have Commission for Disability, and here I must mind, in the designing any intervention, the Minister of Humanitarian Affairs, Hajia Sadia Umar Farouk, insists that agencies like those that deal with disabilities, those that deal with elderly people, they are involved. Why? Because somebody who is young, who is healthy, he has his different challenge during a flood or any emergency. But those people that are already have challenges, you see they have special needs. So when you are intervening, you have to make sure. The bottom line is that I would like to assure people that any intervention done by the ministry or by any of the agencies are solely guided by the principles which are enunciated.
All right, Captain Garba Shehu, we all know that water is very crucial for man's survival. And now there are reported cases of cholera outbreak in some flooded communities as their sources of water have been contaminated by the flood waters. What is the humanitarian affairs doing to address this problem?
You raise a very valid question. You know, people that there are experts in emergency medicine. You know, these things are predictable. Whenever you have a flood, diseases that have to do that are waterborne. All the diseases you mentioned are mostly waterborne because the water source is contaminated, either because of going entry or some of the sewage has managed to penetrate and enter into the drinking water. So these are things that are predictable. And again, it underlines one thing. Disaster management or disaster response is a multi-agency, interministerial decision. Whereas our ministry, the Federal Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs, is the coordinating ministry. That is why President Muhammad Buhari set it up. But you will find that in disaster management, the Ministry of Agriculture, the Ministry of Environment, the Ministry of Health, so many agencies are involved. That is why in 2020, when there was, unfortunately, in fact, we had foreseen this thing. The president at a Federal Executive Council meeting directed the minister to set up an interministerial board to come out with a flood plan, which was launched this year at the Federal Executive Council meeting. But unfortunately, before we could finish, outlining how we are going to, then this thing came. But again, maybe a good thing is a bad thing. What do I mean? This 2022 is the first time that we are seeing this national flood plan action that was approved by Federal Executive Council. How does it work? So certainly there are health issues. There are construction issues, because I've mentioned infrastructure will get damaged, roads washed up, bridges. You see, that one will not be for the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs. So I want people to understand that everybody has a role. So many agencies have a role in disaster response. Health, like you mentioned, Ministry of Works, Ministry of Environment, and not only at the federal level, because I think this is an opportunity to sensitize Nigerians that disaster management, every tier of government has a role, including the local communities. Because like we say in disaster management, every disaster is local. When you read the reports, they will tell you one local government in Bayelsa or one local government in this. So you see, the disaster starts at the local level. Even in the local level, it's a community. So that means even the communities and the local level, they have to be, because before the federal government comes down to intervene, the disaster, we talk about the principle of subsidiarity. That is the people that are in the affected area first. They are foremost, whether it is a state, whether it is a local government, whether it is a ward, they are most placed to even do the initial reaction. But of course, we know some disasters will overwhelm the local coping capacity, and that is when the higher level of government will come in.
Now, what is the collaboration like between the ministry, agencies, and the other parastatals responsible for alleviating the hardship faced by millions of Nigerians affected by the flood?
At the ministry, we are very cognizant of the role that led to the federal government to establish this ministry, which is to coordinate. When you say the role of coordinator, you as the coordinator, they are not the only actor there.
Yes.
So definitely disaster management, just like it involves a lot of ministries and agencies. Some of the agencies are under the ministry, but not all of them. You raise an issue of health. Definitely we will seek assistance from Ministry of Health. People talk about even flood control, dams and everything. Of course, Ministry of Water Resources. People that have lost their farms, they cannot do farming again. Ministry of Agriculture.
Agriculture will come in.
So when the president last year gave the minister, the marching order to bring out a plan on how to attack this, his orders was very clear. Set up an interministerial committee. So we immediately realized we cannot achieve anything as the coordinator of humanitarian response unless we collaborate with all the other relevant MDAs, ministries, departments, and agencies. Not only that, we have to collaborate with state governments. Many of the state government, they have what we have NEMA at the federal level, they also have State Emergency Management Agency. Even though we know a lot can be done. Here, I think it's an opportunity to say that because disasters are local, the local coping capacity has to be. So we'll continue. The minister and all the agencies, they have continued to call on states to have an empowered SEMA, State Emergency Management Agencies. Yes, accepted. I think almost all the states have a SEMA. But unfortunately, in some states, when you talk about SEMA, you are talking of an agency with only one person working there, or two people, or three people. So there are SEMAs, a lot need to be done by the states. Part of the advocacy we do, not only SEMA, at the community level, there's what we call local emergency management committees. We have been encouraging states, including provision of training if they have, to set up local emergency management committees. Because, madam, I want you to understand, if a disaster is going to happen, it's not going to start at federal capital Abuja. It's going to start in one hamlet, in one village, in one local government, in one ward. So what is the capacity? I mean, what can the village should not be left completely helpless. We have been calling on states. The Minister of Humanitarian Affairs has been appealing to states to set up not only SEMAs, empower them, but also local emergency management committees. Unfortunately, as I'm talking to you now, only probably 5 states out of the 36 states have local emergency management committees. I can quickly name Kano, Jigawa, Kaduna, and Adamawa, if I remember, and the federal capital. So you see, like I said, it's something of subsidiarity. Subsidiarity means when a problem happens, the people that are in the area where the problem happens should be the first to do something.
Exactly.
Then when it overwhelms them, then the federal will come. But there is this tendency always to say, where is NEMA, where is federal ministry? We will still do our work, but we still call on the lower levels of government, the subnationals, to understand that what the federal government can do with the federal agencies like federal ministry is dependent also, they too have a role to play. Not only local government, even communities. So we'll continue to make that call, and we realize we cannot achieve any success if we do not have the support of these tiers of government and all other ministries. Disaster management is a multi-agency, interministerial enterprise. Yes.
All right, we'll pause for a break. I'll get back to you.
Thank you.
This is Frontiers, and we are taking a look at the 2022 flood and humanitarian effort to alleviate the plight of victims. We will continue our conversation after this break. You're welcome back. All right, now, Captain Shehu Garuba, what is the response like from international donor agencies since Nigeria was hit by the flood?
Well, through the Federal Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs, even before the flood, we have a very healthy and cordial relationship with all the international organizations, concerning disaster management. Because disaster management itself is an international endeavor. And like Nigeria, as a responsible country, applies and also participates in all the regional and international cooperations that concern disaster, like the Sendai framework, like the Hyogo Kyoto framework, because disaster issues are related with climate change.
Of course.
Nigeria is a very important actor, and we do pay our dues as far as this national cooperation. So when something happens, fortunately or unfortunately for any human disaster, there are countries that are even more challenged than Nigeria. There are countries that have had experience in handling these things. So Nigeria is not ignorant of that, and through this international cooperation, we try to apply best practices. Where we do not have the capacity, we try to build this capacity, whether it is from UN agencies, African Union agencies, or bilaterally with other countries. Because we say when you look at natural disasters, we can say God even has been kind to Nigeria. There are countries that have earthquakes, tornadoes, tsunamis, so there are lessons we learn from them. And the Federal Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs maintains a cordial and healthy relationship with all these agencies that are there. During this disaster, we've had, would I say, visits by international organizations. The United Nations High Commissioner has been to some areas in Bayelsa State and other areas. So we keep them informed, because they have a lot of residual institutional knowledge that we can share with them. So we maintain, just like we maintain a healthy relationship with states and local governments and SEMAs at the state level, we also try to maintain a healthy relationship, to get emerging new best practices from these agencies.
All right, moving forward, the ministry is in charge of coordinating as well as strengthening social system, just like you mentioned earlier. In the light of this, what strategies is the ministry adopting to better handle solutions like this in future?
Well, the ministry, relatively young as it is, because it was set up in 2019 for the first time ever. But honest, as soon as the ministry was instituted, the Minister of Humanitarian Affairs, who is the pioneer minister of this something, she set to work. And how do you set to work? Like I said, disaster management, in as much as Nigeria didn't have a coordinating ministry until 2019, there are countries that have developed processes, procedures, best practices. So what did the minister did? She is always in touch with both internal and external experts to see that we imbibe where are the missing gaps. The ministry came with probably no national policies on how to handle disaster. But since the ministry came in, I can mention several policies and procedures that the ministry has evolved. And when we do these things, we don't like backseat driving. That means, like I said again, I come back to the fact that disasters are local. So if you are going to intervene in erosion in Enugu State, for example, you need to call the local people in Enugu to come to Abuja and say, please, what are your experiences? Then from there, you'll be able to bring a national policy. We have had policies on IDPs. We've had policies on even this flood, which was just launched this year by the Federal Executive Council. We've had policies on elderly people. We have policies on migrants. We have policies. So what we are doing, periodically, all the gaps that exist that will guide national action, the ministry is doing the best it can, drawing on international best practice, and in cooperation with all MDAs. Whenever we are doing a policy, madam, we call all the ministries that are involved, because we want a buy-in. It's not that we sit at the Federal Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs and come out, because we accept and we know as professionals in disaster management that disaster management affects many line ministries, departments, which not all of them are under the ministry. So this is what we do, and I am happy to say that we can count at least nothing less than 7, policies, procedures, or plans or frameworks that the ministry has developed. The latest one being on flood, another one being on localization, and then there is the humanitarian development nexus. There is this new thinking within humanitarian intervention that you don't just stop at giving people palliatives or food. No, you look at durable solutions that will move from dependence to development. So all these are policies that have been, enunciated under the leadership of Minister of Humanitarian Affairs, Hajiya Sadiya Umar Faru, and we continue to churn them out.
All right. What would you say are the lessons there to learn from this 2022 flood?
A lot of lessons. But again, I also say the lessons are still coming in, because we are not mindful of the fact, like I said about figures, any figure we give is figure as of then. These figures continue changing and will keep updating. Now, some of the lessons that came to us are lessons not only for the ministry, but lessons for the whole of Nigeria. I want to talk about the whole of Nigeria, from the federal government, which we are part of, to state governments, to local government, to even individuals. As we intervene in this flood, we see a lot of things. Now, one important lesson that came is that, again, that point of disasters being local, the involvement of local actors, whether it is a state government, local government, or even community level. Building resilience within the community through giving them good advice. What do we find? Some of the areas, they are non-areas, flood-prone areas. That is low-lying areas, like in Bayelsa, that takes almost all the water from the Niger Delta. These areas are this. International best practices shows that if you are building in those areas, it should be a certain level above the water level, because we know the water level. But either due to ignorance, or sometimes we have to admit is due to lack of the financial capacity, people still build below that water level. So if you build below water level, you know that they say water will always find its level. It's a matter of time. The water will come. But you find that such practices still go on. The second lesson we find, which is very, very fundamental, is using of the warning. There is this National Hydrological Agency, which is under the Federal Ministry of Water Resources. Every year, they release what is called the Annual Flood Outlook. In May this year, this I'm talking about 5-6 months back, madam, they released an outlook warning states that such areas are highly prone to flood. Some are averagely prone to flood. Some have low-level threat of flood. But unfortunately, despite this warning, like 3-5 months, most of the states do not react to that warning. So the flood came and caught us. This annual flood is released. We attend. So you see, again, this is something that the federal government cannot do on its own. Federal Ministry of Humanitarian, even the Federal Ministry of Water Resources cannot do on its own. You have been given that warning, is to go and take remedial measures. Because when you look at disaster management, there are 5 phases. There is the prevention. Where prevention fails, because when I say prevention will always fail. There are certain areas or certain parts of the world that are prone to certain disasters, no matter what you do. That's why you see Japan. They will have an earthquake, they are in an earthquake region. Unless they will completely vacate the country, they have to deal with earthquake. So the earthquake comes, they rebuild, but then they put sublesion. So that is the prevention part. There are preventive actions that can be done even from disaster. Where the prevention fails, mitigation. There are things that you can put in place that when eventually the flooding comes, it will reduce the effect on the people. After the mitigation, you also have the readiness or preparedness. There's the preparedness aspect of disaster management. And then you have the response. Now we are only responding because we have missed these 3 phases. Now in all these phases, and finally recovery. Recovery, that is for people to return to their normal way of life.
I'm
So
afraid,
yes.
Captain, we do not have
Yes.
any more time left. Thank you very much. So the summary here, as individual, we also have a role to play, especially when
Exactly.
there are early warnings.
Exactly.
We appreciate you for
Thank you
coming
very
on Frontiers and giving us the insights on humanitarian crisis following this devastating flood. Thank you once more for coming.
Thank you. Always a pleasure to inform the public about these things.
We have been taking a look at the 2022 flood and the humanitarian effort to alleviate the plight of victims. And our guest is a Special Assistant to the President on Humanitarian Affairs, Office of the Minister of Humanitarian Affairs, Disaster Management and Social Development, Group Captain Abubakar Sadiq. Thanks for your time. My name is Obiage.